got this 1990s word processor and it has no internet connection. And this is what I use to write on. I didn't figure out the underlying psychology of distraction.
This is The Strategy Inside Everything. I'm Adam Pierno. All right, welcome back to another episode of The Strategy Inside Everything. We are taking a break from talking about marketing and strategy, but we're taking a new look at it with someone who has a very, very interesting point of view. I am joined today by Nir Eyal, who is an author. You've probably read his work. Most of you know him from the book Hooked, which is how I was introduced to him. Nir, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Adam.
And as great as Hooked is, and I have some questions about Hooked, I know that I was lucky enough to read your new book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. I was able to preview it, so thank you so much for giving me a sneak peek.
Oh, thank you for reading it. I can't wait to hear what you think of it.
Well, we did chit-chat a little bit about it before, but I liked it quite a bit. But before we dive into both of your fantastic works, would you give the audience a little sense of who you are and where you've been and what you've done?
So I started out in the gaming and advertising space back in 2007. We started a company that was putting ads inside apps. But back in the day, apps didn't mean iPhone apps. Apps meant Facebook apps because the Apple App Store didn't exist back in 2007. And so that's where I had this bird's eye view of these apps that were being created on the Facebook platform. And within a very short period of time, they were able to spread to millions of people very, very quickly. And I became fascinated by how many of my clients, these companies would kind of, reach millions of people, and some of them would continue and do very well, and then some of them would just die. And so I became fascinated by the consumer psychology behind how these apps and products are made and distributed and what makes them so sticky. And so I dove into that psychology of consumer behavior. After my last company was acquired, I spent several years studying the psychology of what makes habit-forming products. And I was lucky enough to go to Stanford for business school. And then I connected with an old professor of mine there. And we taught a class together for many years about behavioral design. And then later on, I started teaching a class of my own at the design school at Stanford around habit formation. That became my book, Hooked, which is all about how to build habit-forming products. And so the idea behind Hooked was to help people building products and services out there use some of the best techniques available, the kind of techniques that keep us hooked to Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat. How can we use those very same techniques for good? How can we build healthy habits using these same techniques? So Hooked was published in 2014. So far, it's sold about 250,000 copies. It exceeded my expectations for sure. But then the question I constantly heard over the past 5 years was, well, what about the fact that we're all getting maybe too hooked now?
Yeah, that's where I want to ask you some questions about it. So I was introduced to Hooked. It must have just come out, maybe 2015. I was given a copy of it, and I've since given out a bunch of copies myself. And it's a fascinating book because for a couple of reasons. One, your writing style is just very accessible. So it's technical, but it doesn't feel technical. It feels very easy to read. And I think I breezed through it in a couple of days, maybe a couple of flights. Mm-hmm. So because of your style, the subject matter that you're covering, on one hand, it feels like a how-to book. And this is a way to bend people's will or to capture people's attention. But because of your voice, there's almost like a peeking inside the curtain aspect to it. That's like, hey, look, come here. I'm going to let you in on this secret. And it's like your buddy telling you, like, pay attention. This is how you're getting trapped. So I want to talk to you about it because I've noticed on social too, you play the role of both the expert in this behavior from hey, follow this path to build products like this. But also you walk the line of like, hey, they're taking advantage of you in this way. And for me, I feel both sides of that continue.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So the nice part is that I'm kind of an objective source here. And I felt the problem acutely, right? So I remember after Hooked was published, I sat down with my daughter. We were playing together. We had some daddy-daughter time together. And I remember that I became distracted by my cell phone. I don't even know what I was looking at the time, but I kind of, flubbed this perfect, beautiful daddy-daughter moment because I had gotten hooked. And that's when I decided, you know what, I really need to figure this out. I need to figure out why is it that despite the fact that I know how these companies design these products to get us, why is it that I myself am struggling? And so I went on this kind of quest to figure out how to put technology in its place. And I discovered that there's a lot more to distraction than I originally thought. I bought every book I could find. You can see most of them, on the bookcase behind me here. We're doing a video chat, so you can see those books. And they all basically said the same thing. They all said, get rid of the technology, right? The technology is the problem. Just get rid of it.
Yeah, if only it was that easy, right?
Yeah, and I tried it, frankly. I did the digital detox, and I did the digital Sabbath and the digital minimalism, and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was for several reasons. Number one is that, this stuff is such an important part of our lives these days. It's really nice if you're some, professor that doesn't have a social media account and doesn't need these tools, but I rely on this stuff for my livelihood and I love it. The number of friends that I would not be able to keep in touch with were it not for these technologies, it would really be a detriment to my life to not connect with these folks. Number two, is that, these companies are not going away. So just willing these technologies to no longer exist is trying to, close Pandora's box. It's too late. They're out there. And if anything, technology is just going to become more habit forming and potentially more distracting. So it behooves us to learn how to deal with it. So, and then maybe most importantly, out of these three reasons, the third reason was that I realized that I didn't figure out the source of these distractions. I didn't figure out the underlying psychology of distraction because, I got myself a flip phone. Many of these books tell you, technology is the problem, so get rid of Facebook.
Yeah, or to go to monochrome or black and white on your iPhone.
Yeah, and I tried all that stuff. I literally tried every single technique I could find, and it didn't work because, I'd get out my flip phone and I'd get out I bought this here. I could show it to you. I got this word processor. You can see in the video you're listening. I got this 1990s word processor and it has no internet connection. And this is what I use to write on. But here's the thing. I would sit down to write and say, okay, no Facebook, no internet, no nothing. I'm just going to do what, I'm going to get rid of all these technologies. And then I'd look behind me and say, oh, you know what? There's that book on the bookcase I've been meaning to read. And
that's right.
The trash should probably be taken out. And, the laundry, I should probably go, fold some laundry. And I kept getting distracted because I didn't understand the deeper psychology behind why we get distracted in the first place. So I started to write a book with this idea of I'm going to tell people how to put technology away, how to get unhooked. And then I realized that actually the problem isn't the technology. The problem is also us.
Well,
distraction starts from within.
That's where I wanted to go because knowing your background, when I started reading the book, I was all like, okay, it's going to be about technology. It's going to be about how to break out of that. But it's very quick. A smart thing that you do is you set up, you use the anecdote of the quality time with your daughter where you get distracted by your phone and you forget what the make-believe game you were playing was. But you set up at the very outset, hey, this is what I thought was happening, but that's not correct. And what we need to do is go a little bit deeper. And so how far into the writing process were you when you realized, hey, this is this is a human behavioral trait and challenge. And it's not because Steve Jobs had a vision for making a really smooth piece of glass.
It took me a long time. So the book took me 5 years. It took me a really long time. It took me 5 years to write this book. And the reason it took me that long is because I basically wrote it 3 or 4 times. And then I threw out a bunch of the stuff that didn't work. I thought I would recommend, gray screen your phone and, delete Facebook and do all that stuff. And that stuff didn't work because like I said, I would get distracted by something because I hadn't dealt with what was really going on in my life. And that was a big insight for me that, distraction is nothing new. I mean, Plato and Aristotle talked about the nature of akrasia, this tendency, this Greek word that means the tendency to do things against our better interest. They talked about it 2,500 years ago. YouTube and Facebook did not invent distraction. People have been getting distracted for a very, very long time. And what it takes is us understanding why we get distracted in the first place. And we're not just talking about technological distraction. We're talking about distraction in the workplace. We're talking about distraction with our friends, our family. The idea behind the book is how do we get ourselves to do what we know we should do? We know we should exercise. We don't. We know we should eat healthy. We don't. We know we should sit down on our desk and do that big project, that big assignment. But we'll check Slack for a few minutes or we'll check email for just a few minutes. and we don't do what we know we should.
Right.
Why not? And that's the big question of the book.
No, and it's a downward cycle or downward spiral when you're at your desk and I'll just take a quick break and I'll check Twitter for 2 seconds. And then next thing you know, you don't even know where those 40 minutes went, what you were doing. And it's not all technology. You might have gotten up and walked around and got a cup of coffee or whatever.
Chat with a coworker. There's a million things you can do to distract yourself if that's what you're looking for. So just, the point is that it's not that these technology companies are not making very attractive products. Of course they are. And frankly, we want them to, right? Are we going to say, hey, Netflix, can you please make your shows less interesting? That would be great because I'm spending way too much time watching. No, that's not going to happen. So, that's not a problem. That's progress. We want products to be engaging. So it behooves us to understand how to put them in their place. I like to say how to get the best of technology without letting it get the best of us.
Oh, I love that. But let's go past technology then. I mean, let's talk about behavior. So the feeling I got from reading the book, and I think you just confirmed this, was you started writing the book and thought you were going to test drive some of these lessons or how-tos and cut technology before you realized around version 3 of the book, Rewrite 3, that, hey, no, this is a bigger behavioral challenge. So how far did you get, and did you have a signal in your life that said, oh no, like what was the light bulb moment that made you realize it wasn't technology?
Well, it was when I experimented with some of these techniques. I thought, well, if all these books are saying the same thing, that technology is the problem, that technology is melting our brain. Well, if I get rid of the technology, then the problem should go away. And that's not what happened.
Right. And so what was the first thing then that you just traded as a beta or as a test to test some of the methodology that you walked through?
Yeah. So it took me a long time to figure out what were the most important techniques to try. And so I looked into the science of procrastination. I looked into the science and the psychology of this underlying urge for why we do things against our better interest. And it really was a really fascinating journey around understanding how to unwind some of these self-defeating behaviors. I spent a lot of time researching addiction. I take issue. A lot of people think that we're getting addicted to our technologies. I think that's an overused term, but I looked into addiction because I thought, if we could figure out the most effective techniques to break addiction to chemicals, right, to nicotine, to heroin, to these substances that we ingest into our bodies, which, let's face it, we're not freebasing Facebook. We're not injecting Instagram here. These are behavioral habits. So, but if we could use those same techniques to break these bad habits, and they're effective in those very serious addictions, well, then that would be terrific. That would be wonderful. So I looked at things like acceptance and commitment therapy. I looked at different techniques that we can use, such as setting an implementation intention, which is a technique I talk about in the book. So I basically distilled down thousands of academic studies into these 4 basic steps to become indistractable.
And wait, before we go into the 4 steps, how much did you practice what you preached? I mean, how much? So I know that you read a lot. I know you're a voracious reader, and I know that you thought through it from a logical standpoint. But again, you just strike me as somebody that is a live tester,
Oh yeah.
You got that guinea pig gene going. So
absolutely. and everything in the book that I recommend, I actually use. So for example, pretty much every book out there on this topic will tell you should be mindful and you should meditate. I can't do that shit.
No, I can't either.
I tried.
My brain is not quiet.
I tried for a full year to meditate. And it's not that meditation doesn't work. It definitely works. There's lots of scientific research about meditation. But in I think it's in chapter 1 or chapter 2 in the book, I talk about how I will not talk about meditation anywhere else in this book because there's so much written about it and it didn't work for me. Now, I want to give people solace out there. If it works for you, if meditation is great, do it. Wonderful if it works for you. But there are many people out there like me who never heard anybody say meditation doesn't work for me. And so I wanted to go beyond that. I wanted to give you other techniques. I mean, other than the same thing that we see in the press every single day, get rid of your technology and be mindful and meditate. Well, that doesn't always work for everybody. What else can you do?
Yeah, no, I was very grateful that you moved past that because my brain is the same way. It's just hardwired to chatter and it does not quiet. There's no getting around it.
But that's fine. There's good news. There's a lot that you can do to make sure you don't get distracted.
Yeah, so let's talk about the ideas that you tested and what you kind of how you stumbled into each one, because it's a very linear and logical path. And reading the book, it's like, oh yeah, this is idiot proof. Like even I can follow this.
Good. Yeah. I mean, so I'll give you kind of a nutshell, the 30,000 view of the Indistractable model. And there are basically 3 easy steps and 1 not so easy step. So let me do the 3 easy steps first. The 3 easy steps are: number 1, to make time for traction. Now, traction is the opposite of distraction, right? Distraction is any action that you do that moves you away from what you really want to be doing. Now, the opposite of distraction is traction, doing something that moves you forward, moves you towards what you want in life. Now, in this book, I don't tell you to delete your Facebook account. I don't tell you to quit your job and go live on some yoga meditation retreat thing. I tell you, you can do any of these things as long as you do them with intent. If you want to do nothing, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to watch YouTube, if you want to watch ESPN, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with these things, as long as you make time in your day to do them. The idea is to not let these distractions take you off track, right? So if you plan for them, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. Okay. So as long as you have it in your calendar, and this kills me, when I started the research around overcoming distraction, I would hear from so many people who say, oh my God, the world is so distracting these days with everything that's happening in the news and, Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff is happening. I'm so distracted. My boss wants this. My wife wants that. My kids want that. And then I said, well, that's really tough. I'm really sorry. Can I see your calendar? Can I see what it is that you are getting distracted from? And they would take out their phone and they would show me their calendar and they would show it to me and there'd be nothing on it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This was a huge aha for me is, oh shit, I'm letting people dominate and distract me by whatever calendar invite I get is what fills the day. And I'm not blocking any time or making a list for myself. I don't do it nearly enough to say, I need to accomplish these 3 things before lunch. And then this is my big thing for the day, and prioritizing myself, which is such a dumb, seems like, oh yeah.
You're not alone. You're not alone. It turns out only 10% of people keep a daily calendar. Okay. So that means that 90% of people just let anybody take up their time throughout the day. They get an alert on Facebook. Your boss stops by and says he wants to chat for a little bit. Your kids, they're letting their day be consumed and their time stolen, their attention stolen throughout their day. If you don't plan your day, somebody else will.
Yeah, or even worse, Nir, the people listening to this show are marketing strategy people. So they are typically very, very highly curious and what I think of as combustible curiosity. So wherever they get a spark of interest, you can get down a rabbit hole that is maybe related to work, or maybe you're just like, oh, now I'm going to read, I'm going to lose 3.5 hours about this black metal blog that I just suddenly found myself. I want to learn more and more about it.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to rein yourself in here with you, like controlling your tasks.
It's super dangerous because, particularly for the kind of, the high performer type of person who wants to get a lot done, many times you can trick yourself into thinking that you're being productive, right? I'll just check this email for 10 minutes, or I'll just, do this other thing for just a minute, even though you wanted to do some big, heavy project. That's still distraction, right? Even though checking email might be a work-related task, or Googling something might be a work-related task, if that's not what you plan to do with your time, it's just as much of a pernicious distraction.
Absolutely. So we're talking about planning, and now what's step 2 then? Once we understand traction and kind of setting ourselves up.
Exactly. So we want to make a template for every week, and I talk about how we want to review that template with the different stakeholders in our life, in our work life, in our family life, with our relationships. For ourselves, we have to make sure we plan this time, and then we have to sync our schedules with the various stakeholders in our life. And I tell you exactly how to do it.
You go into a lot of detail about the negotiation that you and your wife went through to work this out. And I actually reread this bit because I was like, I cannot imagine having this conversation with my wife. It's just not how we communicate. So how much back and forth was there, and how much, because reading it seems like, oh yeah, we sat down and we had 2-3 conversations and we figured this out. But I can imagine this opening myself up to this conversation would be a lot of
Oh, tell me more. Okay, so first of all, I didn't mean to make it sound like this was an easy conversation. Just to fill in all the listeners. So there's a part in the book where I talk about how you need to turn your values into time. Meaning, if you don't put on your schedule, on your calendar, the things that you value in life, then you won't be the person that you desire to be. So one of my values was to have an equal partnership with my wife, right? This value of equality within my marriage. And I noticed when we compared schedules that my wife was doing way more than I was. I didn't want to admit it, and I'm still embarrassed to say it publicly here.
But that's it. Like that, you brought this issue up and said, hey, you're doing way more of these kinds of tasks, and I'm absent from a lot of these tasks. That is a tricky conversation to have. But the way it's covered in length in the book, it just feels like. And then I said that, and then we figured it out over a couple of days.
Well, it's because we used to fight about it nonstop. Like this became it was something that we wanted to figure out. And by the way, we've been married for almost 20 years now.
Okay.
So it took many, many years for us to figure this out. But the key problem was, like many women out there. I mean, there's a lot of data that I share in the book as well, that even in 2-income households, somehow women still get stuck with way more work, way more admin tasks than men do, even when it's a 2-income household. And that's not fair. And we can complain about it, we can moan about it, but the fact is, if you don't schedule your tasks, and by the way, like in the defense of us guys, part of the problem is that we don't even know what we don't know, right? Stuff gets done, and we didn't know that it was our responsibility to do that. So this was a big part of the discussion I had with my wife was, as opposed to her yelling at me for, well, couldn't you see that all this stuff needed to get done? But no, I didn't see it. It didn't cross my mind to do it.
Well, I opt not to see it, right?
Or that's even worse, right? That's a little bit more sinister.
Well, I think part of it is kind of sweeping under the rug and being like, well, that got handled. Yeah.
Right. But let me tell you, my life is so much better now. So for example, we prepare my kids' lunches, and we prepare food for the week. And my wife would just do it in this frantic pace at the end of the weekend. And she would be in a really bad mood because I wasn't stepping up, or even worse, I'd planned something else, so I wouldn't even be around. And so it wasn't until we sat down and she said, look, I have to do all this stuff, and you're off somewhere else. So I said, you know what? Let's just figure out what those domestic responsibilities are, and we're going to put it on our calendars. And now I know exactly what I need to do and when I need to do it. And so now it gets done. And let me tell you, it has transformed my marriage.
I would expect that it would.
You sound hesitant to have this conversation with your wife, and I'm super curious why.
Because I'm lazy, and I don't want to do more things. I do a lot, but we don't have it split 50-50. That's for sure.
Well, at least you would know. Like if you say, hey, look, I do a lot, and you showed her on your calendar, look, I keep a time box calendar. I keep track of how I spend my time. Look at it, right? It's right there in front of you. Now we can compare. Maybe she doesn't appreciate how many things you actually do. So it's not necessarily that you have to do 50-50 everything. It's that, people are lifting their proper load.
Everybody's contributing. Yeah,
exactly.
I've long had this thought about happy people, that they don't keep score. So if it's in their marriage, they don't do kind of tit for tat type things, like, well, you got to go out with your friends last week, so I get to go out this week. And when I see that kind of tit for tat at someone at their job or in their relationship, I can always say, like, it's not long term.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that? The tit for tat happens when people feel like they're getting screwed.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely.
So if your significant other feels like you are always there, right? You show up, you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. If you fall off track once in a while, you say, oh my gosh, honey, you know what? I just didn't get to it. I'm really sorry. You get the benefit of the doubt.
That's right. That's true. That's true. So we haven't gotten to making it a calendar thing, but
have your wife read the book and we'll talk.
I'll do it. I don't want to open this can of worms. I'm going to be like, dude, what'd you do to me? I'm making sandwiches again.
It's for the better, believe me. Or what? A lot of it I talk about in the book too, about leverage. Some of it might be, look, it might not be worth either of your time to make sandwiches, right? Maybe it's something that you outsource. Maybe it's a problem that a little bit of money could solve. Or maybe it's a problem where you could actually, I talk about multi-channel multitasking, that there's this myth that people think we can't multitask. And that turns out to not exactly be true. You can actually multitask lots of tasks as long as they're on different channels. So it might be something that you do, you get a bunch of friends together and now you have time with your friends as well as doing these household responsibilities. Maybe it's something you do as a family together. Maybe it's something you do while you're listening to a podcast or listening or watching something on TV. There's lots of ways to get this stuff done that don't sound so horrible.
No, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. And the social aspects of it that you talk about in the book, like getting groups together to do things, is really smart. Let's move on to, so once we get our calendar set and once we get our priorities and our values aligned, what's next?
Next thing is to hack back our external triggers. So in Hooked, I talk about these external triggers, these pings, these dings, these rings, these things in our environment that oftentimes lead to distraction. And again, distraction is when you do something against your better interest, something that you knew you didn't want to do. So an external trigger that wakes you up in the morning and helps you get going to the gym in the morning, well, that's great. That's a good external trigger. But we have to ask ourselves, is the external trigger serving me or am I serving it? So when I was with my daughter and my phone, buzzed and there was some news alert or some, internet garbage that distracted me when I meant to be with my daughter, that was not serving me. That was not helping me. And so the idea here is to hack back these external triggers, not just on your phone, but also on your desktop and also in the workplace. It's, as I mentioned, the book is not just about technological distraction. It's about all sorts of distraction. One of the worst sources of distraction these days is the open floor plan office.
Oh, God, it's gross.
Huge source of distraction. And so I give actually every copy of the book comes with, yours didn't because you got an advanced copy, but every copy of the book when it's published will come with this screen sign that you can fold. It's this bright red screen sign that you can put on your computer screen to let your colleagues know that you're doing focused work and you don't want to be distracted at that time in a polite way. So that people know that you're doing focused work. So there's, we talk about all these different ways to hack back external triggers.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I've worked at places where we've tried implementing red light, green light, or different colored blocks and things like that. And it helps. There's always going to be someone that feels like what they need to tell you is an emergency and they kind of stumble through it anyway. But
yeah, and if it really is a bona fide emergency, then yeah, by all means. But the fact is, you need that little bit of a stopping cue to say, "Whoa, is this really super urgent right now? Do you really need to talk about the game last night right this minute? Because I got this other stuff I want to prioritize."
Yeah, and part of it is if the people on a team if some of them are distracted or distractible, even if it's not silliness, talking about Game of Thrones from last Sunday, if they're distracted because, well, this thing came into my inbox and now I'm going to tap you on the shoulder to ask you about it.
Right.
It's almost like people need to read this book together as units because one person can tear the whole thing down.
Well, that is a good point. And so about half the book is really about things that you as an individual can do.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic here. You could follow everything I tell you to do to a T, but if your boss insists on interrupting you despite you doing focused work and despite it being on your calendar, then you're going to still respond. So part of the problem is culture change. And I talk about how in the book that if you work at a company where people are constantly distracted or have this crazy always on culture, then the problem isn't the technology. The technology or the tech overuse is a symptom of a cultural dysfunction.
Right. And I think most of the behaviors you call out very quickly you can realize as a reader, they're proven that this really has nothing to do with your phone or your computer. It's in your brain and you want the ding or you want the attention or you want conversation or whatever it is.
Right. Or in the workplace, people have become so I would say addicted to work in a way, right? So for many people, it's become the workplace is something that they are expected to always be on all the time. But the thing is, nobody in the organization actually likes it, right? Even the boss doesn't like having his kid's basketball game or her basketball game interrupted at 9 p.m. when they want to focus on their family. So the idea here is how can we deal with this dysfunctional culture. And so I give a lot of ways that companies can take small steps and individuals within these companies can take small steps to start transforming company culture.
Yeah, that's funny. There's so many times on a Saturday night where I catch myself refreshing my email or opening up I only use Slack here in the office. Why am I opening this? at 9 o'clock, but it's for some reason I'm mentally like, well, I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to be the guy that doesn't respond. But I don't think anybody cares.
So that leads me to the next step about pacts and pre-commitments. So part of the idea is, I tell people how to keep themselves, how to keep distractions out by removing those external triggers. And the second to last step is about how to keep yourself in. So when you feel like, I'm going to check Slack when I don't need to, sometimes you do that stuff habitually. And so what you can do is to use what's called a pre-commitment or a pact. And so I talk about in the book how we can actually use technology to make sure that we don't overuse technology, right? That there's all these devices, there's all these apps, many of them free, that we can use to take these pre-commitments to make sure we don't do something we didn't want to do.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about screen time, and we've had Kevin Holish from Moments as a guest on the show to talk about that, which was a precursor to Android and Apple having their own built-in pieces. But so you can easily set those controls. But even before we started recording, you and I were talking about using technology to minimize some of the dumb things that eat up the clock, like setting up this appointment for us to chat. We use an AI scheduler, and it solves some of the hassle. But I'm sure down the road, did you uncover any places where you're like, oh yeah, but now it's like whack-a-mole. Now I have to fix this part of the process.
Well, the idea of becoming indistractable is that it's not something you're done doing, right? I still struggle with distraction, but I'll tell you that now at least I know why, right? I can diagnose which part of these 4 steps is breaking down. I can do something about it by having a clear picture in my mind about these 4 steps that I can do something about. So, you never finish becoming indistractable. It's about striving to do what you say you're going to do. And so with that continual process, with these continuous iterations, I have to say that, since I've started implementing these techniques, and I implement every single one that I recommend, I am healthier than I've ever been. I'm more physically active. First time in my life that I exercise regularly. I have a closer relationship with my daughter and my wife, awesome. And I'm more productive at work.
That's great. Which of the 4 areas have you found are the most challenging for you, or the one that you have to kind of keep hammering down on?
Yeah. Okay. So let me get to the one hard one. So we went through the 3 easy ones: make time for traction, hack back external triggers, prevent distraction with packs. Those are the 3 relatively easy ones. There's a lot of detail there in the book on how to do that, but sure. those are relatively easy to implement. The hard one has to do with what's called an internal trigger. Remember, we talked about external trigger earlier, the pings, the dings, the rings, the things in our outside environment that prompt us to do things we may not want to do. But it turns out that the most common triggers are not the external triggers, but in fact, the internal triggers. Internal triggers are these negative emotions, these bad feelings that prompt us to do all kinds of actions. In fact, all human action is prompted, all motivation is prompted through the desire to escape discomfort. So for example, when we're feeling lonely, we check Facebook. When we're feeling uncertain, we Google. When we're feeling bored, maybe we check YouTube or Reddit or stock prices or the news. All of these products and services we always use because of an uncomfortable emotional state. And this was the really big aha for me, that if we don't deal with what's going on inside us, we will always be slaves to distraction. If you can't sit at dinner with your family without taking out your goddamn phone, let me tell you, it ain't the phone, right? It's not the phone. There's something going on inside you that you have to deal with. And I'm being dead serious here. And I know it's an icky, sticky truth that we don't want to deal with because it's so much easier to blame the technology. There are 2 types of people out there. There are the blamers and there are the shamers. The blamers, they say, it's Facebook, it's iPhone, it's all these companies doing it to me. And that ain't right. And then the shamers say, no, there's something wrong with me. I have a dysfunction. I have a short attention span. I have an addictive personality. And of course, when they tell themselves this, it becomes true, right? And so neither of those are true. The blamers are wrong and the shamers are wrong because they're blaming things outside of themselves, things that they can't control. Whereas the truth is something completely different. The truth is that the problem is a problem of behavior, of habits, and habits can change.
And so you just get into a place where you recognize eventually that, every time I do this, I feel this way and I reach for the phone, or when I'm working, after this amount of time, I decide I need to stand up and walk around and get a cup of coffee, which is another distraction.
Right.
And then it's diagnosing those things or recognizing those things so that you can fix them.
That's a big part of it. So this is where I mention a lot of the research around acceptance and commitment therapy, around how some of the most effective ways to break addiction. And it fundamentally comes down to what are those internal triggers, right? What is it that we are trying to escape? And there's basically three strategies. We can reimagine the trigger, right? We can deal with that internal trigger in a different way, in a healthier manner. The next thing we can do is to reimagine the task. We can figure out, hey, if I really hate doing a particular task, how can I see it differently? How can I make it not be so miserable? And I talk about how to do that. And it's not in the Mary Poppins way of adding a spoonful of sugar. That doesn't work. I'll tell you the real way in the book of how to do that. And then the third thing we can do is that we can reimagine our temperament. And this is the thing that is probably one of the most breakthrough realizations I had, was how much junk science there are and junk folk psychology there is around these myths around willpower. There's this concept called ego depletion, which had got a lot of publicity probably 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, this is really interesting.
Yeah, this idea that willpower runs out like gas in a tank. And there's a psychologist who did a lot of studies on this, and he found a miracle cure for diminishing willpower was to give people sugar. He gave them lemonade. And then at the end of when they had the lemonade, now their willpower was restored. And this is a very powerful notion that a lot of people still think that, that willpower depletes over time. So they come home from work and say, oh, I'm spent. I have no more energy left. I have no more willpower. Let me eat some ice cream and sit on the couch and watch Netflix. And that was me, by the way. It was exactly what I did every day. And it turns out that it's not true. That ego depletion is a myth, that it doesn't replicate in studies that have been done since by other scientists. It turns out the only time that ego depletion actually is true, the only people that do actually experience ego depletion are those who believe it is true.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling, right?
Exactly. Because when you say, oh, I'm spent, I've got no willpower left, you make it so.
Yeah, well, you're giving yourself permission, right? I mean,
exactly. And this is exactly why the current discussion around technology being addictive, that it's hijacking our brains, that it's irresistible, there's nothing we can do about it. This is what drives me crazy, because what we're doing is we're believing this crap, and we are making these companies more powerful by believing that we're powerless. Yeah. It's called learned helplessness. And so a big part of this is changing our view of our own temperament, not believing these self-defeating myths.
I love it. I want to be respectful of your time. So I just have one or two more questions for you, but this has been fantastic so far. So in Hooked, you're giving the case study and talking about how these products are built using behavior. And now in Indistractable, you're talking about how behavior can free you from these distractions and getting pulled into things like products, although it's not all about products in digital. And like I said at the outset, you kind of walk both sides of the story. Do you get pulled in by brands and companies to talk about one side versus the other? I mean, Indistractable is just out now, so maybe it's too fresh, but I kind of viewed your outward persona before I get to know you as an expert on product and probably in demand by all these digital companies that are trying to build these addictive products or these really engaging products. Have you been pulled in the other side to discuss behavior and discuss kind of freedom from habit?
Yeah, well, I now speak on both topics, and I really am in a very fortunate position having sold two companies. I have freedom to do what I want, and I just love to write, and I love to write about problems that I'm facing. So when I didn't know how to build habit-forming products and I didn't find any book on the topic, I wrote one. When I had a problem with overusing devices, with getting distracted, and I didn't find a book that worked for me, I wrote one. And so my goal here is to really shed light on this topic, is to kind of, is to show folks that you can do this, that this is not something that we are powerless to resist, that that the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. That, we give these companies so much credit and so much control over us, by not learning how to empower ourselves. And we live in an age where this is going to become only more important. If you don't teach your kids how to manage distraction, if you don't learn how to manage distraction yourself, they're going to get you, right? These companies are going to get you. I know for a fact, I've worked with them. I taught them how to do some of this stuff. No, that being said, Hooked uses Facebook and YouTube and Instagram as case studies. I don't own any stock in these companies. I've never been paid by these big companies. I use them as case studies so that small businesses, all kinds of businesses, can use these techniques for good. So let's be very clear here. My goal is not to help Facebook in the game.
Yeah, they don't need any more help.
They know these techniques and they have for years. My goal is to help companies like Kahoot, which is a company that just went public. That's the largest educational software in the world. And how great would it be if we could make educational software engaging? Companies like Fitbod that gets people in shape by creating exercise habits. Paga is a company that I've worked with that is bringing millions of previously unbanked Africans online. So these companies are using habits for good. That's why I wrote Hooked. And so, I'm in a really great position where I know how well these techniques work and how we can use them for good. And so I also happen to know that distraction's Achilles heel. And I can share from an insider's perspective, as opposed to somebody who, doesn't even have a social media account or thinks, what's the big deal? Just turn off your phone. I use these technologies, and therefore I understand how these products can hook us, and also how we can manage distraction and make sure that these technologies don't get the best of us.
Dude, that was fantastic. It's been great speaking to you. I really appreciate you making time on this wonderful evening. I know you have
my pleasure.
Places to go. Your calendar's probably telling you where you're going next.
In a few minutes. No, this was great questions, Adam. Thank you.
This has really been a pleasure. So I just want to remind people, the book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. It is available now. Hooked is a killer book. So I know you're focused, Nir, on Indistractable, but if you're on the product side and you have not heard of Hooked, I'd be surprised. But that is a really smart presentation of information about how to do it. And Indistractable brings you the behavior on the other side. But Nir, where else can people find you, and where can they find Indistractable?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So Indistractable is available wherever books are sold, as is Hooked. Actually, Hooked has a 5-year edition coming out, so that it'll actually be updated and revised in some places. And my website is nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, Nir, nirandfar.com.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to that. And if you wish, I will link to a place where people can find the book. And I believe you have an online kind of accompaniment for the book. Is that correct?
Yeah. I have courses for folks who prefer to have a more kind of online presentation format for consuming this content. There's a lot of original content for both Hooked and Indistractable have their own courses.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link to all those things. And I think listeners here will find it pretty valuable. It's smart stuff shared in a very easy to consume way, really easy to understand. So thank you for what you're doing. I've appreciated it.
Thank you so much, Adam.
All right, man. This was great. Thanks again. All
right. My pleasure. And keep in touch and let me know if you need anything. And thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest in these great questions and reading the book. Thank you so much.
You got it. Yeah. Thanks for giving me the access to it. Really appreciate it.
And let me...
Your feedback means everything. Send us a tweet @apierno or @strategy_inside. Leave us a review on iTunes or whatever platform you're listening to. And please share this podcast with your friends. Let people know you like it, and send people you want to be guests our way. We would love to hear more. The Strategy Inside Everything is produced and hosted by Adam Pierno. For information about the show or to find out how to be a guest, you can go to adampierno.com/podcast. For information about Adam's books, Underthink It and Specific, or to find out how to invite Adam to be a speaker at an upcoming event, please go to adampierno.com/speaker. Thanks for listening.